My name is Lizzie and I'm currently a third year PhD student at the University of East Anglia in Norwich. Originally, I studied pharmacy at UEA in the hopes of becoming a hospital pharmacist. I qualified in 2018, and although I love being a pharmacist, I wasn't ready to leave university completely, and I knew I wanted to progress my knowledge further by doing a PhD. I planned to work for a little while before pursuing this, however, the opportunity arose to complete a PhD in a lab I'd previously worked in as part of my pharmacy degree, so I applied and I was lucky enough to be successful in getting the place. Although my main job at the moment is as a scientist, I also practice as a self-employed pharmacist alongside this. I come from a relatively working class background. My mum was a teenage parent at 16 and then my parents split up when I was about 11, so I spent most of my teenage years with just my mum. My family are not academic at all. My aunties are stay-at-home mums, my nan works in a supermarket and my granddad used to drive a lorry, so my career path is quite different to theirs. This means that I'm one of the first in my family to go to university and the first ever to do a PhD. As a result of having me, my mum did not have any GCSEs, but she was able to go to university when I was 13 via an access course to study midwifery. This meant that we didn't have a lot of money, and to be honest, this became the biggest motivator in my education. I knew I wanted a job that would earn good money so I could be comfortable and do the things that I wanted to do. I did enjoy science and maths at school, as I always liked figuring out how things worked, and luckily science careers are plentiful, so this seemed like a good route to go down. Whilst training to be a midwife, my mum had a job as a dental nurse. I didn't know much about dentistry, but what my mum discovered whilst working there was that dentists were incredibly well paid. Throughout my teenage years, dentistry was what I wanted to do, because I knew it would pay well. This changed whilst I was at sixth form. Dentistry is incredibly difficult to get a place on at university, and I was starting to get rejections from a few places. I wasn't sure that it was the career for me either. The idea of being that close to people's mouths wasn't the most appealing, even though I'd be paid well. A number of professionals came to my sixth form to give talks on various careers, including what they entailed and what they paid. I wasn't able to talk to a dentist, but I chose professions that were closely related, pharmacy being one of them. A pharmacist from the local hospital gave a talk about what being a pharmacist involved, and I realised it was far more than just sticking a label on a box, and what more, you could earn good money as a pharmacist. That's when I decided that this was a better career path for me. I ended up contacting UEA to change my backup option of chemistry to pharmacy, and was lucky enough to secure a place. Funnily enough, that same pharmacist that gave the careers talk ended up being one of my bosses whilst I did my pharmacist training. In terms of what a pharmacist actually does, it's far more than most people think. The pharmacy degree is a 4-year master's degree, which sounds like a very long time, but I promise you the years at university are the best and they fly by so quickly. During the degree, you learn about all of the various body systems and diseases that affect them, from conditions such as asthma and heart disease to cancer and dementia, all the while learning about what treatments are effective and how the medicines themselves actually work in the body. You learn about how to communicate with both healthcare professionals and patients, which can be much more difficult than you'd think if the patient is violent or unable to communicate by voice. There's quite a bit of chemistry and physics involved too, including how to synthesise the medicines and the delivery systems that are involved, such as tablets or inhalers. Of course, you also learn about how to dispense and check medication that is given out, but all the while the pharmacist has to check that these medications don't interact with others or that they're suitable for the patient. Even medicines as simple as paracetamol can be dangerous if the dosage is not calculated correctly for the age or weight of the patient. In a hospital setting, pharmacists have to check drug charts written by doctors to ensure that they are safe and the doses are correct. They also have to ensure that nothing has been missed off that the patient has been taking at home. Some pharmacists are now even prescribing medication themselves, freeing up doctors' time. If you didn't want to be a pharmacist, there's always the option of a pharmacy technician. The pharmacy technician's role is massive and ranges from being able to dispense and check medication to giving out advice to patients and even specialising in certain areas. The hospital that I worked at had pharmacy technicians that were able to order missed doses of medication to the ward themselves, and even some that were involved in writing antibiotic guidelines and ensuring appropriate prescribing to reduce antibiotic resistance. The roles in pharmacy are constantly evolving. Pharmacists are doing more jobs that are typically associated with doctors, and pharmacy technicians are doing more of what a pharmacist would typically do. Because of all the scientific knowledge behind being a pharmacist, it means that you're not limited to a career as a pharmacist in your local chemist. You can run your own business, work in a hospital, a GP surgery, a clinical commissioning group, and even for pharmaceutical companies researching and producing the newest treatments for a variety of diseases. My PhD is based on looking at chemicals in nature, particularly in plants such as ginseng, and understanding how they can affect systems in our body. This area of science is called pharmacology, which you may not have heard of before. Basically, it's the study of how chemicals, medicines, and drugs work. You learn about things on a tiny, tiny scale, smaller than a single cell. By understanding how these things work on such a small level, we can link them to various diseases like heart disease or infection. I work on a range of human cells, including a variety of cancer cell lines. These cells have things on the surface called receptors, which are basically switches that, when activated, send a message to the cell to do something. I test a number of chemicals from plants on these receptors to see if they're able to make them easier to activate, resulting in more signals to the cells and an increased response. I measure this activation on a fluorescence plate reader. Basically, this is a machine that measures light. When a receptor is activated, a dye moves through the receptor into the cell and glows. I can measure how bright this glow is on the machine. The brighter the glow, the bigger the graph, and the more active the receptors on the cells. The ultimate goal for my research would be to use these chemicals produced by plants to boost the immune system to tackle infections, such as tuberculosis, which is a disease of the lungs, although that's still a long way off as we still don't fully understand how we could do this. I've always been interested in science, although what aspects of science has changed as I've got older. When I was younger, chemistry and physics were my favourites, although I did find them very difficult. As I've progressed in my education, I've found that biology is probably my most favourite of the three, especially now I'm a healthcare professional and studying how cells in the body function. For my GCSEs, I studied triple science, French, history and geography. Although on the whole I'm quite a sciencey person, I'm also quite creative, and I enjoyed history and geography at school. I tried to pick a variety of subjects so I wouldn't be restricted to one path once I got to doing my A-levels, as I still wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. For my A-levels, I chose to do the three sciences and maths. Whilst these weren't all necessary for my plans to be a dentist at the time, they seemed to be the subjects that appealed to me most. I was absolutely terrible at motivating myself to do work at home. Pro tip, just do things as soon as you get them, otherwise you end up in a mess like I did. So the idea of writing essays in history was a definite no-no. The sciences and maths involved minimal coursework and few exams that I could just get done during school time, so this seemed to work best for me. When choosing your options for A-levels or BTECs, etc., I would definitely advise that you take into account your working style and what is likely to work best for you. The requirements for pharmacy are normally AAB or ABB at A-level, with one subject to be chemistry and another to be one of the other sciences or maths. This does mean, however, that your third and fourth options wouldn't necessarily have to be science-based at all. If you don't get the required A-levels, there's also the possibility of doing a foundation year at university, which will bring you up to speed with everything you need to complete the pharmacy masters afterwards. I still don't really have any idea what I want to do in the future, but what I do know is that I have a variety of options on the table. I never expected to be studying for a PhD this early on. My plan was always to work as a pharmacist, progress up through the pay scales and buy a house before I committed to being a student again. I think it's important to realise that even the best laid out plans don't always work out, and it's good to be flexible with your career plans. I am incredibly glad that I did pharmacy, as it means I'm not limited to one area. I can work in a hospital, advising the medical teams on the best possible treatments. I could be a prescribing pharmacist and hold my own clinic similar to what a GP does. I could be a community pharmacist and even own my own pharmacy business, or I could continue on the route that I'm currently on and become a research scientist, run my own lab, or work for a pharmaceutical company. The possibilities with this degree are endless, and it's great to know I will never be out of a job. Many people don't realise this, but a PhD is actually paid. For some, you'll need to do a master's degree first, although these can now be funded by a government loan similar to an undergraduate degree, so there's no need to save up for one yourself. For most science PhDs, an undergraduate degree in a related area is enough. Although Although what I earn now as a PhD student is less than I'd be earning as a pharmacist, it's tax-free. This means that my pay works out around the same as someone working an entry-level office job, but I don't have to pay for council tax and I still get student discount. It's also an incredibly flexible way of working. I get to choose my own hours, I'm able to work from home when I'm not in the lab, and if I need to take a day or so off, I can. I'll just make up the hours another time. I also get 8 weeks of holiday a year, so I can still have a sizable break during Christmas and summer. Although I'm technically a student, my hours and pay are more like that of a full-time job. I'm still able to afford to rent a house with my partner and our cat. I can still afford to pay for my car, and I still have time to do all the things I enjoy outside of science. For example, I've recently started sharing a horse, and I'm able to work my hours around going to the stables in the morning and then going to work afterwards, which I would not be able to do as easily if I was still working as a pharmacist full-time. I still work as a pharmacist, but I'm something called a locum pharmacist. Locums can pick up work as and when they want, which is something I'm considering doing after my PhD until I figure out what it is I'd like to do. Locum pharmacist work pays very well. It's not unheard of for shifts to pay £30 an hour, which helps top up the wages I get from my PhD. The fact that my PhD is so flexible means I can keep up my skills as a pharmacist and be a scientist at the same time. Science offers a really diverse range of careers, and pharmacy and research are both careers that I would recommend. You don't have to compromise who you are to have a career like this. I'm still able to wear makeup, paint my nails, do my hair, visit friends and family, socialise and practice my hobbies. Even during difficult times such as COVID, my work has remained largely unchanged and I'm still able to work as both a scientist and a pharmacist. For me, it's important that I'm able to earn enough money to be comfortable, and my career has definitely allowed that. Whilst on a placement at university, I found that working in an office environment was definitely not for me. I need a job that is flexible and changes regularly, where I can work with and interact with others, and I enjoy how varied my current roles are. One minute I could be advising a patient on a rash that they've got, the next I'm advising a doctor on the best treatment for a patient with high blood pressure, and the next I'm making and testing new chemicals that could lead to medicines and treatments in future. I'm proud of my career and, most importantly, I really enjoy it.